Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video is going to show the fastest fully upgraded muscle cars in terms of lap time. We're quickly going to go over the slowest vehicles right now, and as always the position counter is in the top left with the best lap time the car achieved in the top right. This video only focuses on track performance, so if you're interested in top speed where braking, cornering and acceleration aren't relevant, check the link in the description for the top speed testing series, and if you want to know more information about this testing, including the extent to which it's accurate and how useful it is for you personally, have a read of the full description as everything that you need is in there. So the muscles class is the last of the very big classes, obviously 40 vehicles in this class. It's another example just like the sports class where there are a lot of vehicles that get forgotten about, and frankly there's plenty of vehicles that could be better served in different classes. Like what we'll see in a few positions with the Moonbeam and the Moonbeam Custom. No idea why those are in the muscle class instead of the vans class, and if they were in the vans class they would be right on the pace of the top vans in the game, but because they're in the muscles class they are way down the order and never ever going to do anything decent in a race. The lap times that we're seeing here, over 1 minute 20, are very slow, and when you compare them to the lap times that we'll see at the end of the video from the very best vehicles, these vehicles that we're seeing now just are never going to be able to do anything in a race. They don't have they've either got very poor top speed or acceleration, really bad traction in the case of sort of the slam vans and the rat trucks. They're just not very good cars at all in terms of performance, and that's really not the point of them, I guess, because a lot of them are lowriders. So yeah, we're going through sort of all of the really slow vehicles in the muscles class, and with 40 vehicles, unlike the sports class which has 44 vehicles and quite a significant amount that are all at least relatively decent, the muscles class has 40 vehicles and a good half of them are really poor in terms of speed. You know, it doesn't have that same depth that the sports class does in terms of the lap times that the vehicles can get lower down the order. So the Moonbeam Custom here, as you can see, in 27th place, as I've already mentioned, it should be in the vans class really in terms of its performance. With a 117.4, we're already into the top, almost at the top 25, and the lap times that we're seeing are already, they're still not great. So the faction here in 26th place is actually exactly the same as the faction custom, which we'll see in a short while, but the regular faction has a significant trouble getting over curbs. You may have seen other videos from my channel where we've had faction races, and they're pretty hilarious because the car just cannot get over curbs and it flips and bounces all over the place. That's why it gets the lap time that it does. And I would say a lot of vehicles in this class so far in the top sort of, the bottom 20, like the Virgo Classic Custom for example, they're very forgettable vehicles. You know, the Virgo Classic, the Virgo Classic Custom, the Faction Custom. You know, there's so much there that they added with the Lowriders update to this class that a lot of it just gets forgotten about. So we're coming into the top 20 almost now, and this is where we're starting to see some decent lap times. We've seen a significant increase in lap times with the Lurcher and then the Vigero, and now in 20th place we've got the Faction Custom with a 113.3. Still, that isn't a fantastic lap time, in comparison to the sports class. This would be slower than all but one sports cars in the game, but in comparison to the muscles class, we're actually starting to get something that is not too bad. The Buccaneer here in 19th place with a 1 minute 12, we're getting up there again. We're seeing sort of significant increases in lap time at this stage of the list and at this stage of the video. And then in 18th place we've got the Buccaneer Custom with a 1 minute 12.2. In general, the custom vehicles of cars when it comes to the lowriders are pretty much exactly the same as their regular versions. I think the Voodoo is the only one that's slightly different really, but the Buccaneer and the Buccaneer Custom, they're pretty much exactly the same in 18th and 19th place in this class. Now in 17th place we've got the Gauntlet. A 112.0 for the Gauntlet isn't all that fantastic. It's not too far off the pace of the top 10, but it is significantly off the pace of the top few. And the Stallion here, it's the same story again, half a second quicker in 16th place with a 111.5. A lot of people often go to the Gauntlet because it is one of the sort of more consistent vehicles in the class, and the same with the Redwood Gauntlet here, is a little bit quicker than the regular version of the Gauntlet with a 111.4. But the fact that it doesn't get a spoiler on the back of it, obviously spoiler upgrades in Los Santos Customs increase traction, which increase cornering speeds and decrease lap times. that doesn't, they don't get the spoilers, and because the Gauntlet doesn't get a spoiler, it does suffer in terms of lap time compared to all the other muscle cars, because spoilers are quite important when it comes to the muscle class, because they don't have an awful lot of traction to start with. So the Phoenix here in 14th with a 111.1 marks sort of the start of a significant number of vehicles that are all very, very close on pace. You could include the Redwood Gauntlet and the Stallion with that as well, but as you can see here with the 1 minute 11.17 from the Tampa, that is only 0.02 of a second quicker than the lap time that we just saw from the Phoenix, putting it up into 13th place. And then in 12th place, just ahead of it, we've got the Slam Van Custom, which also gets a 1 minute 11 lap time. And then just ahead of that, we'll see a vehicle that also has a 1 minute 10.9. So all very, very close. And you could consider this sort of selection of vehicles to be the third tier of the muscle cars class. We will see sort of a big jump in performance when we get to the top 10, and that will start sort of the second tier, and then ultimately we'll have the top tier of vehicles at the very end of the video that really you can't compete with those vehicles with any of these or any of the second tier of vehicles either, because they're just so good. Now, just missing out on the top 10, we've got the Burger Shot Stallion, the end of this third tier of vehicles, and then just ahead of it in 10th place, we've got the Sabre Turbo, the regular version. It's still quite a competent vehicle, this, with a 1 minute 10.1, that's a big chunk of lap time taken off what we just saw from 11th place, and it's still a competent vehicle, and this would be right on the pace and very possible to use in muscle car races if we didn't have that top tier that I've been talking about that we'll see at the very end. And this is sort of everything in the top 10 would be very competitive against each other without the top tier of vehicles that we'll see. In 9th place, we've got the Duke of Death, a 110.1, very, very close in terms of lap time again from the vehicles that we're about to see. Obviously, the Duke of Death is only available in single player for the people who have returned to the game. It's a special single player aspect for new gen platforms. But yeah, for the sake of completion, I do include everything, and the same is true here for the Ruiner 2000, a 1 minute 10.0, so very, very close in terms of performance to the Duke of Death. In 8th place, it's a very competent vehicle, especially considering the Ruiner 2000 doesn't get the benefit of having a spoiler on the back to increase traction. It's a very, very quick vehicle if you can afford it in free roam and just mod it up and drive it around. But it is a tiny little bit slower than the regular Ruiner here in 7th place with a 1 minute 9.9, only a tenth of a second between them, but yeah, the regular Ruiner is just slightly quicker. I will just point out that there is a rusted version of the Ruiner which came with the import-export update that is drivable through the use of mods, but the way that I do these testing is that I only test vehicles that are accessible and drivable in single player or GTA Online through normal means without the use of mods. So that's why you don't see that in this video, but it's basically just a rusted version of the regular Ruiner. Now in 6th place here, we've got the Coquette Blackfin, a 1 minute 9.8, only a tenth of a second quicker than what we've just seen from the Ruiner. Again, like I said, very, very close that we've seen from 10th all the way to 6th. And we do start to increase the lap times a little bit with the Dukes here in 5th place. The top 5 is always where it gets significantly interesting for classes when it comes to these videos. But unfortunately, 3 of the top 5 are still not going to be very useful in races. They would have been in the olden days of GTA racing, but not anymore, because we do have the top 2 which are miles ahead of everything else, as we'll see. But the Dukes here with a 109.6, only 0.2 of a second quicker than the Coquette Blackfin. Still a very, very good vehicle, it's got decent traction. And then in 4th, just ahead of it, we've got the Blade. The Blade gets a 109.2, so that's a significant increase in lap time. It's a good half a second quicker than the Dukes. It depends on the track, because the Blade doesn't do very well in very high speed circuits because its top speed isn't that great. Obviously we've got the top speed testing video for this class coming tomorrow, but it does have very, very good acceleration. And as we come into the top 3, we've got the best of the old boys of muscle cars, I guess you could say, with the regular Dominator just keeping that 3rd position with a 1 minute 9.0 lap time, so only 0.2 of a second quicker than the Blade, but still a very, very competent lap time in the muscle cars class from the Dominator. This always used to be the best, but it has since been taken over by DLC vehicles, and this is kind of the final vehicle in the sort of second tier of muscle cars, as I was talking about earlier, because the top 2 are significantly quicker than everything else. They are miles ahead, and the Dominator or anything below it can't really compete with either of the two vehicles in the top two spots in terms of lap time or in terms of top speed as well. So in second place we do have the Sabre Turbo Custom. This is incredible. The way when this was released, it was absolutely insane that they could have made a car that was so overpowered. With a 1 minute 6.8 lap time, that is over 2 seconds per lap quicker than everything else in the game. And you have to remember that when this car was first released, there was nothing else to compete with it. It was just the regular Dominator and everything else that we've already seen in this video. So we had all of those perfectly balanced muscle cars, and then the Sabre Turbo Custom comes along and completely ruins the class. But that isn't the case anymore, because our number one vehicle in the game can still take it to it and beat it. It's of course the Pisswasser Dominator. It is only 1/10 of a second quicker than the Sabre Turbo Custom, and it is going to depend on the type of track, because as we'll see from the top speed testing video tomorrow, the Pisswasser Dominator has a very high top speed, and it is slightly better than the Sabre Turbo Custom. So it all depends on the type of track. On tracks that have a lot more corners, the Sabre Turbo Custom is going to be the best one to use. On tracks that have a lot more straights, the Pisswasser Dominator is going to be better. But on more balanced tracks, they are quite even. As you can see here, there's only 1/10 of a second between them. A 1 minute 6.766 for the Pisswasser Dominator and a 1 minute 6.866 for the Sabre Turbo Custom. I would say that the Dominator is a very difficult car to drive and get a handle on. So if you do have trouble with the Dominator, it's probably a better option to use the Sabre Turbo Custom instead. It will probably be a lot more consistent, but ultimately the Pisswasser Dominator will be the quickest if you can control it and you can handle it, but that isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. And it's just, you know, the Pisswasser Dominator itself, along with the Duke of Death and the Redwood Gauntlet and the Burger Shot Stallion, the sort of the race car versions of the muscle cars, those have been in the game since the release of GTA 5 on next-gen platforms. They were a returning player bonus for people who transferred their character over from the old gen of games, Xbox 360 and PS3, to the new generation of games. But they were never made available online. So obviously when the Sabre Turbo Custom was released, it completely demolished the class, as we've seen here, and we had that sort of that second tier of muscle cars that I talked about used to be the top of the class, and they were all very well balanced and it was a joy to race them. The Sabre Turbo Custom comes along and absolutely destroys the class in the same way that the Sterling GT did with the Sports Classics class. And for a long time after that, I said they should just add the Pisswasser Dominator to the game. You know, it's already in the game, it already exists in single player. Just let us have it, because it was clear that the Pisswasser Dominator was a lot better than the regular Dominator based on the stats and based on the little bit of driving that I'd done with it. And then ultimately they did end up doing that, and that gave us back some balance to the class. There are now at least 2 options in the muscle cars class to use, but there are only 2. If you have a race where you're, you know, banning the use of the Pisswasser Dominator or the Sabre Turbo Custom, there will be a lot more options for you to use, as you've seen in this video, but ultimately nothing else can even hold a candle to the top 2 in the class. And really it doesn't matter which one you use, as long as you use one of them, you will be significantly quicker than anything else in the class. So that's pretty much it. Obviously we've got the top speed testing video for this class coming tomorrow. It's a big one, it's a long one, but it's the final video of the sort of the big classes with 40 different vehicles. It's difficult to talk about every single vehicle in the class because there's just so many, but yeah, it's only really the top 2 that you need to worry about. So that's pretty much it. Remember to obviously read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed or found it helpful, and subscribe for more. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.